to the program. It was a trifecta of good economic news this week. Strong economic growth, strong jobs growth and an interest rate cut. In theory, the government should get some credit. Australia is defying the global economic headwinds. But Tony Abbott isn't about to change tack. He maintains we do better without this bad government and without the carbon tax. Joining us this week, the Minister for Sport and Multicultural Affairs, Kate Lundy. Peter Bentley is from the Labor-aligned McKell Institute. Richard Muller is a former Liberal advisor and public relations consultant. And Peter Dutton is the Shadow Health Minister. Welcome to you all. Peter Dutton, I might start with you. Do you give the government any credit for the strength of the economy we've seen this week?
Well, David, I think if you look at the national figures, there are some impressive figures there, but it defies the discussions we're having on a daily basis with small business people around the country. The country at the moment, for whatever reason, is deprived of confidence both in a business and consumer sense, and people aren't expanding their businesses.
So how do you make sense of that difference? Why do the figures say one thing but your experience another?
Well, I think if you look to the obvious answer, and that is that the mining sector, I think, is providing an incredible boom for us, but the fact is that small business people in particular are finding it difficult to get credit. They're not putting on extra staff, people are having their overtime cut back, people are seeing their assets devalued, and all of that combines to provide great uncertainty, and I think that's a big part of the problem that the government's got at the moment. People see Wayne Swan up there singing a great tune, but it defies their own experience, and there's a big disconnect between where the government's rhetoric is and the reality for people on the ground.
Richard, you've worked in the private sector for many years. How would you characterise the economy at the moment?
It's clearly in a state of divide. I take issue with you on three ticks, because if you look at the state of the economy and the interest rate cut, isn't that the Reserve Bank saying that they're concerned about the economy looking forward? And the data that we had on economic growth was the first quarter of this year, and that showed, if we exclude the mining states from it, it showed that over the last 12 months the economy for 70% of Australians in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania and the Capital Territory grew at 2%. Right? Which is not impressive by any standards.
Impressive by world standards, though.
Well, how can you say 2% is not impressive? It's not as good as the rest of the economy.
True,
sure, but comparatively speaking, we're doing very well.
But the rest of the world is not riding on record high prices for commodities, which is the bread and butter of our economy, whether they're agricultural or mineral. Nor are they experiencing the very strong, sustained demand from a growing Southeast and East Asia.
Well, just on that, Kate Lundy, how much credit does the mining sector and the mining boom deserve for these impressive figures?
Well, I think the Treasurer acknowledged today that it's a very strong commodities market and we are benefiting from that. But it's important to recognise that other areas of our economy are in fact still growing, and the significance of today's economic news and this week's economic news is that there is still strong growth occurring. It is important to look at that relatively speaking to the rest of the world. We are still in the grip of a global economic downturn, and Australia is consistently performing well. Just to address the issue of small business, with our tax loss carryback measure in this year's budget and the $6,500 rebate for assets purchased, are both measures designed to specifically help small business through what is a tough time.
But getting back to mining, it is driving the economic strength in Australia at the moment, and yet the Treasurer is out there bagging the mining magnates. Shouldn't he be praising them, thanking them?
Well, let's have a look at the whole picture of the Australian economy. What this government's trying to do is make sure that all Australians benefit in the benefits from the mining boom. Many of our measures, including the MRRT, are about making sure we share those benefits. So on the one hand, we acknowledge it, but we also say that we all deserve a share in those benefits. Those resources come out of the ground once, and the government has a responsibility to make sure that dividend is pushed around the country, so not just the mining companies and workers fortunate enough to work in mining at this point in time, we distribute those benefits.
Peter, Richard made the point, when the Reserve Bank cuts interest rates, it's normally because it's worried about where the economy is going and wants to stimulate the economy. That news did seem to jar with what we then saw the following days on economic growth and jobs growth. Do you think the Reserve Bank maybe got it wrong?
No, I think the Reserve Bank got it absolutely right, and I personally think they should have been cutting more and earlier. The fact of the matter is we do have a two-speed economy. I don't think anyone's arguing that. But the numbers that we saw yesterday were phenomenal. They at a macro level are very impressive and show that broadly the economy is doing very well. But we do need to recognise, and I think the Reserve Bank in cutting the way it has recognised that the East Coast in particular is doing it very tough. There are retail, manufacturing, there are a range of sectors out there that are doing it very tough, and we need to be providing, housing construction, if you look at yesterday's figures, was right down in the doldrums, so we need to be providing support and we need the banks to be continuing that. But I think the broader message out of those positive and very impressive accounts figures is that we still have a lot of work to do, both, as Kate was saying, in redistributing some of the benefits from the boom, but also, more importantly, I think, is the long term. And we have an economy that's doing very well in mining, very well in a range of different sectors, but is struggling in a lot of other areas. And we really need to look at how we're engaging with Asia.
Across the board, there's a real issue with productivity. Productivity growth has stalled. And we can't underestimate the impact of the massive investment in mining infrastructure that has had on the account figures that have come out yesterday or today. I think the underlying picture is that yes, there is a dramatic two-speed economy, but there is a whole bunch of people on the eastern seaboard who are really struggling, doing it tough. I mean, we look at
isn't that an argument then for spreading the benefits of the boom as the government?
Absolutely, but it doesn't mean that you don't stop real reform for businesses who create jobs.
Well, one of the things.
What are you talking about there? What sort of reform?
Listen, I was really encouraged when the Henry Tax Review was was established. Only one thing's come out of that: massive waste of time, energy, and money. There's been no addressing for small businesses on things like the amount of paperwork they have to do. The instructions for the single-page BAS statement are about almost 200 pages long, for goodness sake. There are real issues. I mean, the availability of credit is astonishing. And not only small businesses, but large enterprises are having to go and try to find equity rather than debt because it's so difficult to actually keep your business going with working capital.
This is real business experience that the two sides of politics don't seem to be talking a whole lot about. We're caught in this argument about the mining tax, yes or no, spreading the benefits of the boom, yes or no. Do we need to look at ways to really help those businesses doing it tough? Peter Dutton.
Well, of course we do. And it's not just an east-west divide either. I mean, there are plenty of businesses in Western Australia who are on the fringes of or outside of the direct impact from the mining boom industries, such as automotive, for argument's sake, where a lot of their workers are going to work on the mines, and it's the same in northern parts of Queensland, where in Mackay, for argument's sake, it's almost impossible to get staff to work in the retail sector. And so there's an upward pressure on housing, there's an upward pressure on some of the costs of doing business, not just in wages. And people aren't coping because the sales and the turnover is not there. And it's exacerbated and you see some of this from time to time where there are fly-in, fly-out arrangements and money's not being spent in those particular towns, and in some cases that's for good reason. There's not accommodation there to house the workers. So I don't think we should underestimate how much pain, and going to Richard's point, banks are just not lending money to small business. The loan-to-value ratios have been reduced dramatically. People can't get the sort of valuations that they were, so they're being crunched from both directions.
What can you do about some of these things?
Well, I think what you've got to do is get confidence back into the minds of business people and consumers. And Wayne Swan might have good numbers to talk about, but when he stands up there and rehearses these lines and delivers them, he just doesn't exude the same confidence that Peter Costello did.
Come on! I've got to take you up on that. So what you're saying is that all of those good economic outcomes don't matter. It's how Wayne Swan says it. That is the most pathetic argument to have a crack at what is a very healthy economy.
I'm just reporting to you the numbers as they are, and that is that people don't have confidence.
You've already acknowledged the numbers are good. All of the forecasts are really strong for Australia.
These are the polling numbers and people's views of your Treasurer.
But hang on, what you're saying with your relentless negativity of the opposition is that it can all be, great economic news, but you still don't accept that the country's in far better shape than it's ever, that it could possibly be in the circumstances.
Kate, I'll tell you
all you can do is level a personal criticism on Wayne Swan's style.
I just want to call it how I see it.
Bordering on the most ridiculous.
I just want to call it how I see it, and importantly, how people report it to me from small businesses that we go and talk to.
That's a different issue, and I'm happy to talk about the measures we put in place in the budget for small business, and I've already mentioned a couple of them.
You do seem to be talking more about what focus group research on Wayne Swan.
Let's actually talk about the economic figures and what that impact is on business.
Let's get to this issue of confidence, because Wayne Swan's accused you guys, the opposition and some in business and the media as well, of being doomsayers, naysayers, of talking down the economy. Do you accept any of that? That when it does come to injecting confidence, the stuff that Tony Abbott's been saying hasn't particularly helped?
Karen, I think, David, I think people are hanging on to two things. One is that they think there's going to be a change of government, and they think they're going to be rid of the Gillard-Rudd-Swan experiment, and I think people are saying, we're sitting on our hands until we can get rid of this government. I think that's the first thing that people in business are hanging on to. The second thing is that people know that the fundamentals of our economy are strong because we went into the GFC with no debt. And people understand that if you look at...
Yeah, but the question is about talking down on the economy. Do you accept that that's been going on?
No, I don't. And I think if there is a lack of confidence, it's this government telling people that they're fools. I mean, in Newspoll at the moment in Queensland, in my home state, Newspoll is 60-40 against the government. Now, that is nothing to do with the way in which we might report how we believe the government's performing. It's a reflection of how people see this government as being dysfunctional and not delivering for their families.
Except that we're not dysfunctional. We are governing. Legislation is passing. The economic figures do speak for themselves, and they're very positive. So what the observation people are making is that there's relentless negativity from the opposition with no substance.
One of the unwritten stories.
It was only yesterday that Penny Wong was saying that the confidence of Australian consumers will be damaged by what's going on around the world and overseas. So I don't accept your point that it's negativity just from one sector. There's a whole bunch of people who are saying, hey, hang on, yeah, your top line figure's great. Western Australia is growing faster than China, but the fastest growing economy on the eastern seaboard, with the exception of the mining states, is the ACT at 3.1%.
The interesting thing when we look at the figures that came out yesterday is one of the unsung songs is actually, I think, the maturity of the Australian consumer, and we saw, apart from mining, one of the major drivers was consumer spending, and in addition to that, Richard, we also saw consumer saving, and this was something that 20 years ago we rightly were kind of saying that Australians, we might be living beyond our means, we might be spending too much. And we've actually, I think, seen a maturity of the Australian people in that we've hedged our bets, we're putting aside a bit, but we're also spending it, and consumers
we've been saving about 9% of our incomes for the last 2 years, and that's been fairly consistent over that period. Now, for me, it's one of two things. It's either a change in long-term behaviour as a result of the GFC, or it's still a lack of confidence. It's still a lack of confidence that, hey, I've got to put something away for the rainy day because it might very well be around the corner.
Lack of confidence, let's talk about that for a sec. So we know with the figures this week, we've created, I think, 46,100 new jobs over the last little while. Unemployment's up slightly because more people are entering the workforce and looking for work. That, to me, looks like a sign of confidence that people are now looking for work. They see things turning around, reality doesn't match up with your rhetoric.
I disagree entirely because, put yourself in the position of a worker, a single-income family in manufacturing industry in Victoria. If I was sitting down around the dinner table, I'd be really concerned about losing my job. So of course I'd be trying to go to a two-income family.
But I'd be more concerned if the Liberal Party that you're saying is going to, everyone wants to be in government, is the one that would cut the I think $1.5 billion out of the packages that we put into automotive. So when you look at it at a granular level, it's Labor that's doing the good work. It's the opposition that wants to unpick it.
This confidence problem is largely being driven by what we see on the news every night, and that is Europe on the brink. The US underperforming. We've seen weak growth in China as well. People are worried about the global economy.
Of course they were, David, as they were with the Asian financial crisis, as they were with 9/11, as they were with other economic bumps that have come along the way. Experiences of, the Hawke Keating years, of the Howard Costello years. But I just come back to this fundamental point, and I think that when the history of the Gillard-Rudd sort of period is written, Wayne Swan is going to have to accept his fair share of blame. I mean, Wayne Swan was the architect of, at least in part, the carbon tax, the mining tax. People, 2/3 of Australians are desperately
Sure, but if that's the case, surely he also deserves credit for some of the figures that we're seeing at the moment. I mean, if he's to, if you're going to pin everything on him, you've got to pin some credit on him too.
And can I say, seeing Australia through the GFC, where we didn't contract as an economy.
We came through the GFC.
You have to acknowledge that credential.
I mean, if you look at the debt that places like Spain and Portugal and Italy, all of these places had enormous debt.
When are you going to acknowledge the good economic management of the Labor government through that period of time? It was an extraordinary achievement.
Okay.
It was
throwing money into the wind is not good economic management.
Creating jobs when jobs were needed.
Just pick up on something Peter was talking about before, and I think we do have a two-speed economy and there are a lot of challenges out there, but I think one of the most important economic documents that's actually going to come out this year is Ken Henry's review of the Asian century. And Australia, as we've seen in the accounts yesterday, we are tied to China. Right now our mining sector is benefiting immensely from China, but I think as we look forward in our economy and look at manufacturing and look at a whole range of other sectors, we need to be tying ourselves to Asia and looking at how we integrate and re-gear the rest of our economy. Look at tourism, look at retail. China right now, this day, has a middle class of 300 million people, the size of the US. By 2040, they're going to have a middle class of 1.4 billion. And this is something both sides of politics and we really need to be looking at and looking at how we re-engineer.
Do you think we're doing enough, not just with China, but with Indonesia and with India as well, or do you think these economic relationships are underdone?
Can I say we can always be doing more, and I think there's always room for improvement, but the establishment of Ken Henry's Asia White Paper is very significant, and I think when that's released, that's something that both the government, the opposition, and as importantly, if not more importantly, the business sector, our tourism sector, will be really looking at how we engage more. And
yeah, sure. That sort of review is very important, but so is ministerial contact. And do we see enough of the Prime Minister in India and Indonesia?
Having been to India recently, I can attest to the strong interest and the growing strength of the relationship between our two countries. One of the areas with one of my roles in assisting Greg Combay on industry and innovation is ICT, information technologies. And that's an area of our economy where we've long had a strong relationship with India for a whole range of reasons.
You've got to acknowledge it's underdone, this trading relationship with India.
I think it can always be strengthened. I think part of the purpose and the vision behind preparing Australia in the Asian Century paper is to look at those strengths and those ties. But again, can I point back to the budget measures? In the area of supporting the development of skills, of making sure that we have our strong research, development and commercialisation strategies, all of these things, the funding for which has been maintained is very strong and growing in the tertiary and university and R&D sector. That will augur really well for what the economic relationship looks like with these countries. And that trade partnership and how we build our businesses
which is great.
And providing the skilled people to do that is an essential part of it. And we've been thinking about that for years. We didn't cut R&D funding when we came to government, like the Howard government.
Just finally on this, we do need to move on, but if the story is so strong on the economy, why doesn't the government get credit for it? Surely this does come back to Peter Dutton's point about a lack of confidence in the government and the Treasurer in particular.
Well, I want to pin a couple of things on the opposition here, and that is the relentless negativity and the style of opposition that they are.
You don't take any responsibility for that at all?
I think the atmospherics of the global downturn bite into confidence all of the time, and part of our challenge as a country is to boost the confidence through the strong economic measures.
So it's not Labor's fault at all that you are where you are?
I don't think it's too much to ask the opposition to acknowledge when our economy is moving in the right direction, it's going really strongly, to say, yes, this is good news, as Joe Hockey did on Bloomberg TV.
Have you wasted any money?
Recently.
Have you wasted any money over the
on
last 4 years?
Bloomberg TV recently, and he's got into trouble from all of his colleagues
what
for
I'm getting at
saying
is
it.
you don't accept that the political instability that we have seen under this since the last election, because we're in a minority government, because of the problems we've seen within Labor, leadership challenges and a speaker appointed and then having to stand aside, all of this stuff, you don't think that's affected confidence?
I don't think it's affected confidence as much as the opposition likes to say it's affected confidence. I think the confidence issues relate to the global
What about
economic
stabbing Kevin
environment.
Rudd right through the middle of the back? Do you think, did that have any impact on the Australian people and their view of your government?
Just using a little bit of
square
nasty
centre.
emotive language is
Square
not going
centre.
to intimidate the
And
people of
maybe the
Australia.
same's about to happen to Julia.
I don't think we're going to get...
nice
Just quickly,
I just wanted to touch quickly on this the debate about India, because I think it's an incredibly important one for us to have. And it's not a criticism of the government. I think the same can be levelled against us when we're in government. I mean, we are rightly preoccupied with China. I think that's...
It's where the action's at.
Of course, and that's as you'd expect. I think we're underdone in terms of our engagement with Indonesia, our most important partner. I think PNG, there's a lot of work for us to do there because it remains on the brink. India, I think, is a relationship that we need to continue to grow because, coming back to Peter's point before, and I hope that Ken Henry is able to bear it out, I think there is enormous opportunity for us. And there is a cultural disconnect, but there are a lot more personal relations now between the two countries that I think will be very exciting for us going forward. But there's no sense in pretending that we can discard our relationships with the United States or Europe. I mean, if the US falls in a heap over the course of the next 12 months, then pity help everybody.
I think there's probably going to be general agreement on that. Richard, you want to...
I was just going to say, I think the big danger for us is becoming too obsessed with China. Because they're in the wonderful position of having truckloads of cash. They can buy what they want. They have a dramatically growing economy. They have a huge presence, and they're trying to secure their future, not in 10 years' time, 20, but 30, 40, 50 years' time.
Yes.
We need to be careful that we do not compromise our future by putting all our eggs in the China basket. We need to be well aware of our citizenship role in the whole of Asia. If China's concerned about food security in 40 years' time and wants to buy up truckloads of Australian land in Northern Territory and whatever, well, what about Vietnam? What about the Philippines? What about Thailand? What about all those other countries which are going to have the same food security issues? We've got to think about what our role as a nation and the values that we have and how we apply that to our decisions today about the future of the country in Asia in 20, 30, 40 years'
And
time.
look, and can I say that our multicultural character as a nation serves us so well in our engagement, not just in our region but around the world, because we have such a great representation of people who've chosen to make Australia home, that gives us an enormous strength of insight into what is happening, particularly in our region, that serves us very well.
All right, we do need to move on. We'll take a quick break, then we're going to come back and look at border protection and the news this week that an alleged people smuggler was living in Canberra, in a suburb in Canberra, but then fled the country a couple of nights ago. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're joined this week by the Minister for Sport and Multicultural Affairs, Kate Lundy, Peter Bentley from the McKell Institute, Richard Muller, a former Liberal advisor and public relations consultant, and the Shadow Health Minister, Peter Dutton. I want to turn to border protection and the revelations we saw on the Four Corners program at the start of the week about people smugglers slipping through the net, posing as asylum seekers. One of them who featured prominently in the story, known as Captain Emad, and was living in a suburb in Canberra. Turns out, we find out today from the Federal Police Commissioner, Tony Negus, that he was and is under active police investigation, but the very night after that Four Corners program went to air, he left the country. Not disclosed exactly where he's gone, but there wasn't enough evidence to stop him leaving. Is there something, Kate Lundy, wrong with the system that can happen?
No, I don't think so. I think what we now know from the AFP statements is that he was being investigated, and I have every confidence that if they'd had enough evidence to prosecute Captain Emad, they would have initiated that.
So it's a pretty powerful case put, though, in the program about what he'd been up to.
Well, I have a confidence that the police know their job, and there's a big difference between what high-quality investigative journalism can achieve and what you can achieve in a prosecutable
The point that
case.
that Scott Morrison, the Shadow Minister's made, is if someone's under active police investigation like that, should there be a mechanism that you can cancel his refugee visa? What do you think?
Well, what we now know, of course, is Minister Bowen is reviewing the case in light of new information that's come to him, and we'll see how that pans out. But I don't think there's anything that Mr. Morrison has said.
But I think he asked for that review after the program went to air. He's been under police investigation for some time. I think it was for more than a year, maybe 2 years. If someone's under police investigation on a refugee visa, should there be a mechanism to review the visa earlier?
Oh, well, I think that would be available to the Minister, and what he's agreed to do in the light of this coming to air. Perhaps there was some responsibility of the investigative journalists sharing their information. I don't know.
Well, she did. Tony Negus was full of praise for how she worked with the police on this, but this is the question. Should there be a mechanism to suspend a visa if someone's under police investigation?
My understanding is that Minister Bowen has those mechanisms available. If the information was there to create cause for that, that would be done. What we won't do is abuse process. We saw what happened with the Hanif case under the coalition government, where his visa was cancelled in the absence of evidence, and in fact a case which was of course overturned in the High Court. So we do respect due process. We have every confidence in the AFP, and Minister Bowen has now said that he will review the situation in light of new information coming. But everyone is working together. That's how our system works. I think Mr. Morrison is sort of clutching at straws to try and get a piece of the story.
Thinks about that. I mean, it is a tricky area. Cancelling someone's refugee visa isn't a step that should be taken lightly. What sort of line would need to be crossed in your mind to take that step?
Well, David, I think the first point to make is that this is the latest policy disaster from the government, and nobody's critical of the police. They can only work with the tools that they're given. And
how is this a government? How is this the government's fault?
Look, I think the whole issue of border protection and the failure of the government in this area speaks for itself. I mean, we've had, 50 boats this year already. The numbers are just flooding in, and it shows.
Support our legislation to allow for the Malaysia arrangement, and we know the disincentive to people smuggling will be put in place.
We might get to that.
We can discuss your propaganda lines in a second.
Well, we can discuss yours right now.
All right. Now, if we can just talk about this case in particular, Captain Emad, he was under police investigation, but after the Four Corners program, the next day he leaves the country. Is there something wrong with the system that can happen?
Well, of course there is. Of course there is. And what's at fault most here is that the government didn't have the capacity to get across this before Four Corners did. Now, the services, starting with the AFP, starting with ASIO, with Customs, all have had their budgets cut at a time when they're under enormous pressure dealing with the influx of these people. And I don't think clearly...
So this is a resourcing issue. You reckon the police could have caught him if they had resources?
I think part of the problem for the government is that there is a resourcing issue.
Oh, you just made that up. There's no part of that discussion about it.
Did you cut the money of those three budgets?
Hang on a sec. We're talking about an issue of having the investigative capacity in a prosecutable case. So it's a function of due process and the law. So you're just now saying that you can disregard due process on the basis of what's happening in those agencies. I just think that's ridiculous.
The Commissioner made no suggestion that there was a lack of resources on this case.
Of course he wouldn't, David. I mean, that's his role is not to go into the public domain arguing for more resources. No Commissioner has ever done that. But the fact is that this government has taken resources away from these agencies. At the same time, they've dismantled a policy which was working. And there's a whole debate to be had around temporary arrangements as opposed to...
Okay, let's see what Peter and Richard think about this. That someone can leave while they're under police investigation for people smuggling. They can flee the country. What do you think? Is there something that can be done about this?
It's very frustrating, and I think all of us kind of see this and saw Four Corners, and I've seen there's allegations, and I'm frustrated, I'm sure we all are, but I think we need to take a step back and look at, mistakes seem to have been made, but within the department. But this is a department run by human beings. Mistakes will always be made. There were mistakes made under the previous government. Mohammed Hanif, Vivian Solon, Cornelia Rao. There will be problems.
The Commissioner did make a particular point, and I thought this was a very interesting line. He said, when asked generally about potential people smugglers slipping through the net, posing as asylum seekers, he said, there are literally thousands of people coming through this pipeline as we know, it's a very difficult job to make sure everyone's human rights are respected and we deal with these people quickly and fairly, and sometimes these people can slip through the process. He seems to be indicating that because of the sheer number of people coming through the pipeline, this is bound to happen.
Well, I think there's 2 points to be made. Firstly, if the allegations against Captain Emad are accurate, then this guy knows how to game the system. You know, he makes a living plying his awful trade, and he would know better than anyone else how to get through and how to get through borders, you know, be they Australia or anyone else's. But I think the second and broader picture is we need to step back and look at, well, how do we solve this? And we need to be looking at a regional solution.
All right, we'll get to that. Richard, what do you think?
I think there are some very clear things that come out of this, and the whole debate about illegal immigrants, asylum seekers, call them whatever label you wish to, has been going on for some time, and we now have the benefit of a fairly large body of evidence. You know, we've had a very significant inquiry, Senate inquiry earlier this year on the impact of detention and that kind of thing. We've seen this policy, we've seen that policy, and there are some things that I think come out of it that are undisputable. One, a deterrent is critical. A strong deterrent is absolutely imperative. The argument has been from those wanting tougher border protection that the regime or that it is possible for people of uncertain and unclear backgrounds to slip through the net. And I think this has clearly demonstrated that that's the case. So that there is a national security issue that is complex and can't be fixed simply. You know, it's there. And the third thing is that over time, Australians are becoming more and more disconnected from the whole issue, because it's the minutiae, I hate to say it, and please forgive me for putting a pox on both your houses, but it is the minutiae, the argument over you said it's your fault. No, it's not. It's their fault kind of thing. It doesn't really edify what should be, I think, a more noble discussion. I mean, isn't the time, after more than a decade of looking at this issue, isn't the time now to be sitting down and saying, OK, let's find common ground. Let's find a solution. Let's let the centre actually win. Let's come together on the issue rather than be directed from, you know, extremes on either sides of politics. Because there was a time where if you said, oh, hold on, I'm concerned about people coming into this country illegally because they might be potential terrorists, they might have taken on somebody else's identity and persona, they might be criminals, you're branded a racist.
This does seem to be the single biggest example of where the two sides of politics agree that we need offshore processing for the reasons you've articulated, but won't come together because the nature of politics.
David, we believe, as the government, that we've offered every single opportunity that the opposition could possibly, ask for.
Well, the one thing
to
you
come
haven't
together.
done is said, let's just set up Nauru.
Well, no, that's not true. And there was some discussion about Nauru being presented as part of what a negotiated
But it came with conditions like it had to go alongside Malaysia, which is not a signatory to the Refugees Convention. We get back into that whole argument again.
But what it showed was enormous intent on behalf of the government to try to come to such an arrangement. So this is, I guess, one of the epitomises the opposition for opposition's sake that we're getting from Tony Abbott and his cohorts. It's negativity without substance, and I would say in this case without reason as well. So I take
what is so unreasonable about this position of the government?
Legislation that we want them to support.
Offshore processing in Malaysia and Nauru, considering temporary protection visas. Why not? David, give that a go. These are the guys in government.
Sure.
We want to be able to govern.
There are a couple of reasons why we're so adamant our solution is superior to the government. I mean, the first is that we had a solution. Nauru and temporary protection visas, amongst a suite of other issues, worked. And that's indisputable. No question about that. Now, this government came up with all sorts of, talk of regional solutions. They settled on Malaysia. There's nothing to demonstrate that Malaysia would work.
There was evidence.
I'll let you finish that. So just let me finish. But
did work.
The point is that if you ask the public, who I think are fair judges of this, and I take on board Richard's points before, would you have greater faith in the Howard government solution to be re-implemented, or the Rudd-Gillard government solution to be implemented, I think 80% of Australians would say, I prefer to
But
see...
putting public opinion to one side...
But I think that just reflects the reality of the two policies, though. I mean, this government... It's important to understand why we're at this position. I mean, the government decided to undo Nauru, not because it wasn't working, but because it was John Howard's plan. That was the political motivation, and it's resulted in disastrous policy.
I don't think we're going to get agreement on where offshore processing should be. So let me just go back to this question of detention and security checks. Now, there has been, as Richard, you pointed out, a Senate inquiry into the length of detention. One of the big factors there is the time taken to give the ASIO clearance to people who come in on a boat. But, as we've seen demonstrated this week, there's good reason for lengthy, detailed security background checks. It does pose a difficulty, doesn't it? Peter, do you think we're doing enough or not?
It really is a case of damned if we do, damned if we don't we? And we've seen that in the past, you know, and I think the Minister made the point that he's often accused from different interest groups of taking too long, and in this case, and I think it goes back to the point I raised, that this character, Captain Ahmad, obviously knows the system and perhaps, you know, knows how to judiciously kind of be processed through it. But I think the broader point that we need to be kind of looking at and considering is this is, and making the point, Captain Ahmad and any other bad apples in the system are a very small number, and for every one Captain Ahmad there are 10,000 people that are, you know, running, trying to dodge a bullet in a war-torn country coming here. And as with all these things, and as with all public policy, you know, it's about getting the balance right. And I think the more we're processing quickly, and we're not causing, you know, pain and suffering for people, the better. But as you say, you know, when these sorts of things do happen, we need to act very quickly, and there's always lessons that can be learned from incidents like this.
Do you agree then with the Federal Police Commissioner in saying that because there are literally thousands of people coming through the pipeline, sometimes these people can slip through the process?
Look, I know that our security agencies, the processing system is doing everything it possibly can to make sure that people don't slip through the system.
But because of the sheer number, he seems to be saying, sometimes people can slip through.
Well, I think it's just a reflection of the fact that someone has, and there's now an investigation continuing around those people. I don't think it's an acknowledgement that anything has failed per se. In fact, it's an acknowledgement that the system's working because these people were under investigation. Case was being,
I don't want to state
according
the
to the police, a case was being built around their role that they played in people smuggling, and that is yet to play out. So in many respects, this is evidence that these people are under investigation. So he didn't slip through, and it's being pursued.
To my mind, there should be more resources going in to identify who these people are to make sure they don't actually come here in the first place.
Well, this is the point that David made. It's that balance between the time a security assessment takes and the time people spend in detention. We know that time in detention, as you pointed out, is incredibly stressful, and it can lead to other problems. So getting the balance right with the security checks so people don't slip through the system, but getting people out of detention who are legitimate refugees and using tools like community detention and placing children and families outside of detention centres becomes part of a really complex, difficult and challenging policy mix. And I think due credit ought to go to the sensitivities around getting that balance right.
If you've got a dozen people coming a year to this country on boats under the Nauru policy.
But the solution... Nauru did not work. I want to go back to the point you made.
I mean, if you've got a dozen people coming under, you know, the Howard government scheme, if you like, and you've got 10,000 people coming under your scheme, is it any wonder that the length of time taken to process these people has blown out, and your noble objective of getting people out of detention is completely blown out of the water because you've got thousands of people landing.
Our legislation.
You've got thousands of people landing on our shores. Of course, it's going to take longer for these checks to be done by the police.
We do need to move on. I don't think we're going to get a lot of agreement on this one once again. Stay with us. We'll take a break. Come back. Look at the latest twists and turns in the Craig Thomson saga. joined this week by the Minister for Sport and Multicultural Affairs, Kate Lundy, Peter Bentley from the Labor-aligned McKell Institute, Richard Muller is a former Liberal advisor and public relations consultant, and the Shadow Health Minister, Peter Dutton. I want to turn to the latest bizarre twists in the Craig Thomson saga. The former prostitute who initially signed a stat deck claiming that she had slept with him has now recanted that, apologised, said she checked her passport, she was not in the country at the time, she's sorry. And what's more, she told Channel 9 a few days before they went to air that was the case. Richard, first to you, do you think this changes anything, either in the court of public opinion when it comes to Craig Thomson, or indeed in relation to the allegations made against him?
I suspect that one morning I'm going to wake up and realise that this is actually the Jerry Springer Down Under show, because it's now starting to get a little ridiculous. But if you look at long-term impacts, court of public opinion, I think what this latest incident does is Craig Thomson should be quite a happy guy, because it really questions the credibility of anybody else who comes forward and says, hey, hang on, I saw this guy, or I knew this guy, or whatever. So, it's a very lucky break for him.
Yep.
I think it's, confirmed in the minds of most Australians that 6:30 is an interesting time slot in television, commercial television.
But, Kate Lundy, it doesn't really change the findings made against him, the allegation that he's facing.
Well, and he's provided his response to that in Parliament, but I think it does, this whole sort of recent flare-up shows, checkbook journalism has no place.
Well, that's the other element of this.
Really, I don't think that's the issue, though.
Oh, no, but I think...
It shouldn't be the issue. I mean,
but if you look at the 6:30 time slot, then it is the issue.
Well, no, the allegations are that there's been a massive breach of trust in the HSU. Members' money has been used, or it's alleged that has been used in the most tawdry way.
And the process is unfolding to resolve all of that.
Craig Thomson's reputation, this helps him because it muddies the waters, it creates confusion, and it certainly discredits anyone else who comes forward and says,
I think Richard's right, and this is the reason why I think the circus needs to end. These are very grave allegations. We all know that. Craig Thomson has made a statement to the Parliament, we and everyone in the court of public opinion can make our own assessments about that statement. But the more this circus continues, it doesn't help the HSU
in our prior
members.
Discussion, the Minister made a very important point that it is not only policy that people make a judgment on, but the process of government, how government or politics is played out. And sadly, the whole saga around Craig Thomson has not been played out very well. It has discredited the Parliament. I don't think the Prime Minister or the ALP have really shown good leadership in this. And I think people are genuinely sick of it. So my solution is very simple. Let's get some ALP and Liberal fanatics, plus a few Greens for good measure, in a studio, get Jerry Springer across, one episode, let's get it done with.
Sort it out. Peter Dutton, do you agree with the point Richard makes? This has muddied the waters. This does mean that some of the allegations against Craig Thomson are being looked at in perhaps a different light now?
Well, look, I shouldn't laugh, but it has got to a ludicrous position. I think the saddest part is that all of us, and I still think being a parliamentarian is a noble profession, and I think the vast majority of members on both sides of Parliament are noble in their pursuit of a better country. And, this guy's done us damage, there's no question about that. The courts ultimately will determine, presumably, his innocence or guilt, but in the interim, I think Julia Gillard, in relying upon his vote, just further taints the government, and I think that's the sort of the most unfortunate, tawdry part of it. But, there's the Fair Work Australia pretty damning report. I don't think the tit-for-tat between Channel 9 and 7 around this particular player or alleged player is going to change the dynamic at all. I think people are waiting to see now whether Thomson gets charged by the police, and I think most people, frankly, see him as a liar, and unfortunately he's put his family into this position He's put the rest of his colleagues into this position, and I think there's an admirable course for him to take. But it seems that he's going to stay in Parliament.
The course of justice unfolding.
No
you just judged him.
Well, I've made my opinion. I've seen.
Okay.
I've seen the evidence from Fair Work Australia.
Okay.
That's fine, but there's a process underway.
I'm not suggesting that I need to be the judge and jury. I was asked for my opinion on the issue. I mean, his day in a court before a jury no doubt will come. I'm saying what his actions have done now.
Point where you said that we shouldn't be relying on his vote, because of course that is the height of hypocrisy.
You kicked him out of the Labor Party. Why did you do that if you're presuming innocence?
There have been Liberal members, senators...
No, I'm asking you, why did you kick him out of the party if you're presuming his innocence?
That was a decision made because of the controversy surrounding it, of course.
But he wasn't convicted. How does your double standard apply?
No, I'm asking about the Liberal Party double standard here, where you had people who were charged, but there was not
with shoplifting,
not a peep about the principle. But you're arguing this on the principle.
I'm asking you why you.
But there is, Minister, a contradiction that Labor says we should let the courts decide, and yet the Prime Minister did call him up and tell him he shouldn't be in the caucus.
No one is denying that there are a series of very serious allegations that are underway, but I was agreeing with what you're saying about it does reflect on all of us. I think we all, the vast majority of people
serious
in Parliament for the right reason.
No conviction. No conviction, though.
No conviction
as you've been pointing out.
That's right.
So why then is he forced out of the Labor Party?
Well, I think if you have a look at his statement, then Mr Thompson decided to do that.
Hang on, I thought the Prime Minister made that call.
Well, it was certainly under the, I think, encouragement of the Prime Minister.
So why did she encourage him to leave? If he's not
for the right reasons.
Gentle encouragement.
This is, Peter, let's bring you... This does muddy the waters of the Labor argument on this, doesn't it? Kicking him out of the party, but telling everyone to wait. But the Minister
is contradicting directly the Prime Minister's assertion. I mean, the Prime Minister gave an account of her conversation with Mr Thompson, and the Minister is now disputing the Prime Minister's claim.
I'm not at all. I think that the Prime Minister was quite right to draw the line in the sand with Craig Thompson. The controversy was hurting all of us. I think it was hurting the Parliament. I think it was hurting certainly the government, and I think she made the right decision on that.
I think the fact of the matter is this is politics, and we need to kind of step back and look at this, and this is a minority government. Craig Thompson had these allegations made in the previous government. When Kevin Rudd was Prime Minister, there was a majority of 10, and the opposition weren't particularly interested then. Now, they're very interested because, it's a minority government. Just like in Victoria, we have a Labor opposition that are very interested in allegations that have been made against a Liberal Member of Parliament in the Baillieu government.
Completely disagree with you.
Let me just finish. It's a one-seat majority, and this is politics being played. And
politics has nothing to do with it. Everywhere around the country, the Labor Party is on the nose. It's on the nose because of deep-seated cultural problems within the ALP. This is an example of a massive breach of trust of a group of people who are supposed to be advocates, who are supposed to have the best interests of their members, and they are abusing.
Can I just pull you up on one thing, Richard? This is allegations against two or three individuals.
That's what I'm saying.
And they're horrible allegations, but I think we should never allow this to tar the entire union movement or any other union.
Well, the point is it has, though, hasn't it? That's the problem. I know the ACTU has been very firm in suspending them from the ACTU and trying to say, but the reality is this does tarnish the union.
It has, and it's a very unfortunate state of affairs because I think, regardless of these allegations, union organisers are out there, they're earning, relatively low wages for the work that they do, and they spend every waking day working hard for their members.
I'm astonished at the wages of some of the senior union members.
As we all were with the HSU, but let's look at every other union official, and they're earning a third of that if they're lucky. So, and this is the point that I agree this issue should be focused on. We should discuss it, and full process should be followed. But I don't think we should allow anyone within the community or the media to kind of use this as a stalking horse. These horrendous allegations against three individuals to try and tarnish the entire...
So do you think we should have transparency around the accounts and the amounts of money that's being paid to these executives?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So there should be full disclosure?
No, I think there should. The ACTU actually, I think 2 weeks ago, called for that at their Congress. Minister Shorten, I believe a fortnight ago, was started to introduce full disclosure, and that absolutely should be the case.
So maybe put unions under the same corporate regulator as companies.
If the company CEO was accused of the same thing, they would be pilloried from, they would be lambasted. So why not have the same provisions in the Corporations Act that apply for directors of companies apply to unions?
But this is a really interesting point.
Well, why not do that, though?
Well, I think there should be very stringent regulations. There should be full transparency. Now, unions are different bodies. They're not-for-profit organisations, and I'm not an expert in...
Charities are not-for-profit organisations.
Absolutely.
The level of transparency required of them in their reporting is astonishing.
Absolutely. And there should be full transparency, and we should learn from this as an issue.
The basic principle is this. They are stewards of other people's money. Right? A charity is a steward of other people's donation.
Absolutely.
The leadership of unions are stewards of those unions, of other people's money, of their membership, and that's the breach of trust.
On that point, we are going to have to wrap things up. We're right out of time, unfortunately. But Kate Lundy, Peter Bentley, Richard Muller and Peter Dutton, thank you all very much for joining us. Thanks for your company as well. We'll be back same time next week. See you then.